The Online Marketing Cabin is brought to you by Impside, Europe's biggest WordPress agency. If you run a website or online shop or are in need of a WordPress or WooCommerce plugin, Impside is your go-to agency for solutions on an enterprise scale.
Hi, Andrey. Nice to have you here. How are you and what keeps you busy these days?
Hi Marcus. Thanks for having me. I'm great. It's lovely Friday morning, so I'm starting on my coffees, and I think getting ready for the weekend slowly. Also, what keeps me busy is where do I begin? I think you know that for the past couple of years, and that's part of the reason how we met as well, is that I've been working on this amazing adventure called the Privacy Sandbox. So I think we'll talk a little bit more about what that is and how it works later today, but that definitely keeps me busy.
Yeah, great. Exactly. Privacy Sandbox or cookieless web is the reason why we're here today, and the reason why we met, I think, last year in November, where you have given a little presentation about what you're doing at work, how Privacy Sandbox is affecting or is taking care of something that will affect the whole web, like the deprecation of cookies. And that was the initial kickoff where I thought like, wow, I have to keep in touch with Andrey about that stuff because I don't hear anywhere else very loudly about that. But I think it's a very important topic where a lot of web workers, might it be advertisers, publisher, website owners, every mom and pop shop or blogger will be affected in the next year and has to somehow check if they are ready for it as a company or as a private person, a private entity. So let's talk about the cookieless web and what that means today. Before we jump into that topic, we always play a little game here. It's called Two Truths, One Lie, where you can lie shamelessly into my face. And let's see if I can spot the lie by the end of the episode. Have you prepared some facts about yourself for us?
Yes, I got 3 facts for you. All of them are true, obviously.
Okay.
So let's. How much detail do you need from me? Just the bare minimum, or a little bit of color?
Yeah, you can add a little bit of color. We have time.
So if you count cities where I lived where I was not fully conscious, you can say that I lived in 14 cities. Then I built my first website at the age of 19. And I'm not proud of it, but I'm proud of the fact that I did it. I think it no longer exists and nobody can find it anymore, so that's okay. And also, I speak 9 languages, human languages, to be precise.
Human languages is like a very
exactly. So we're not counting
interesting.
Well, we're not counting HTML and JavaScript.
Yeah,
right?
Okay. Okay. Every fact has a number in it. Like 14 cities is a lot. First website with 19. That is a little bit late. I think I built my first one with 12 years old or something. It was also not something where I'm proud of, but like I think you're just a little bit more early in the web. So you have been 19 years old. Could be a truth. Do you remember what the website was about?
Yeah, for sure. It was at university and it was about the society that I was a part of.
Okay. 9 languages is a lot.
I know.
I would give it to you. I saw some image of you in social media where I think you posted it on LinkedIn where you were running. Like I could definitely give you that you are kind of extreme also in your private life and like having a productivity and doing like a lot of sports, then learn a language, then go to dinner and call it a day or something like that, being fully optimized. But yeah, 9 languages is a lot. Let's see by the end of the episode. Maybe you can give some hints here and there through the episode, and we can discover
okay, some mysteries
it together.
I like it.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm bad at the game, so don't be nervous. I will probably not spot your lie, but you can reveal it by the end. So, talking about Privacy Sandbox, what is it in simple terms for us who maybe have never heard of it or are not aware of it completely right now?
Well, look, I think it helps if I begin maybe by also explaining a little bit more in detail, well, not in too much detail, but briefly, what is it that I do so that people understand what perspective I'm coming from. I'm not an engineer, and nor am I, not even a site creator, despite having built a site at some point. Maybe I built a couple more since, but still, I don't consider myself to be a site designer or site creator. For the past 7 years at Google, I've been on the partnerships team, and I consider that to be probably by now my main career and my main specialization. I'm a technology partnership specialist, and this is where I'm coming from. I have a decent understanding of the technology, and my main role is in bringing this technology to the outside world. So I cannot speak to all the technical details. Don't ask me. Well, you can ask me, like, well, how the cookie was invented, for example. I might have a bit of that background, but I can't get into too much technical detail with you on that or the APIs that we'll get to discuss. However, with that color given, I hope for our audience, and actually my perspective might be the one that will be useful. The Privacy Sandbox think of it as an initiative. It's a name. It could have been anything. It could have been Bob, but it happened to be the Privacy Sandbox. I think some developers sometimes, especially maybe in your companies, your developers might be a little bit led astray by the sandbox in the name, because that implies that there might potentially be some sort of an environment where you do specific things. It's not about that. And to complicate things, it is not just a Chrome initiative. It is also an initiative joined by Android, which is doing its own things. And I'm not at all a specialist in the Android space, so we're not going to talk about that too much. But there are some concepts that overlap. So why is it that it could be an initiative by jointly Chrome and Android? Because of the underlying principles. And these are, to me, what matter. If we boil it right down to the essence, is that we need to keep the web and, I guess, the Android ecosystem running sustainably and using slightly older technologies and older approaches that don't have privacy built into them undermines that sustainability, because ultimately it undermines trust, it undermines users' engagement with those platforms, Chrome specifically, and therefore we need to find different ways of creating successful, profitable products and services online on the web and on Android without using those technologies. So it's an initiative then, if we come back to Chrome, about stopping the use and phasing out the use of some of the older technologies, right? And then to be specific, so we don't lose you completely, we're talking about here the user agent string in Chrome. That's already been reduced. Now, this user agent string that you get from Chrome by default now is much shorter than what you used to get a year ago. The second one is the big one. You mentioned cookieless web. It's not quite cookieless. We'll get into those details, I think, as well. But third-party cookies in most scenarios will no longer be supported by Chrome. So what does it mean? If you're on a website and that website contains an embed, an iframe, something from a different source that tries to set a cookie in this context without additional work, which we'll cover later maybe, that will just not work, right? So that's what's being phased out, there's third-party cookies. And then there's also changes coming to the way IP information is being shared by the browser. And as we go into the future, more and more areas that we refer to sometimes as covert fingerprinting will be tackled. I highly encourage you all, and we'll probably drop a link into the comments somewhere, to read the vision for the private web that has been published by a colleague of mine, actually a colleague in the sense that he's from Google, but he is actually a real good software engineer and he knows what he's talking about. So there is he and his team put together this, I think, sort of program document of where we want to go in general, not so much specific details, but where is it all heading. And I think my main takeaway from it is that this is not a finite game. This is about an approach. So this the Privacy Sandbox is an initiative, but it's to some degree, it's a philosophy, it's an approach to saying we will look at how the web operates and we will continue to strike this balance between keeping it working well and ensuring that user privacy is respected and the users are aware of it and appreciate it and therefore engage with it even more. So there's this initiative to remove certain things or stop relying on certain things. And at the same time, especially on Chrome, specifically on Chrome, I would say, in order to preserve the operation of all the products and services that our users already know and love, we need to introduce alternatives. And it's also important to remember here, so it would be kind of strange to replace cookies with something else that works exactly like cookies, because what would be the point? In the case of cookies, for example. So what we're doing here is saying, okay, cookies as a concept of this state-preserving entity that you place onto a storage on a device that can then be tracked across multiple websites. We can't do anything like that because by definition that just doesn't work. So what is it that we can do to make sure that targeted advertising continues to work, that cybersecurity continues to operate, that personalization is possible? How can we do it using modern technologies? And I mean, you guessed it, there's probably going to be some machine learning involved for sure, right? There's some really interesting research and advances scientific advances in privacy that we've been seeing for many years already that are now being used in this space as well. We can come to that if you want and discuss that in a bit more detail, but generally to paint you a picture, we are, instead of this, in the case of cookies, one mechanism, one quite simple, I suppose, mechanism to save information and track it, we're going to use a bunch of different things based on varied technologies to achieve the same and hopefully even better results. I am emphasizing this not least because I think if there's one thing I would like everybody who's listening to remember is that we are not replacing cookies with something else. You're not just like, oh, instead of cookies, now I have to use this other thing.
That would have been my question now. Yeah.
Right? There's no this other thing. Cookies, again, with some caveats that we can get to, are going away. But now we have a choice and a combination of different modern technologies that we can and should use, depending on what it is that we're trying to achieve. So there we go. And that's the Privacy Sandbox. Not so much in a nutshell, but let's say it's in a coconut nutshell, in a big...
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think it's a complex topic, so it's okay to not put it into the smallest nutshell that you can find. Let me try to summarize what the Privacy Sandbox is, also from my non-developer, non-technical standpoint. From what I understood now is that the Google Privacy Sandbox is an initiative to offer a more private web based on new technology that is available, that still tries to find the balance between giving advertisers, publishers, website owners the tool they need to have a profitable and successful business, but also having website users or giving website users more privacy in not being tracked in very old ways, which are maybe not should just not be used anymore because they don't offer the levels of privacy that are necessary. And one big topic that everybody has in mind, which is like the most visible thing of that, is the deprecation of third-party cookies. Mm-hmm. You talked about that. What is the timeline on that?
Well, that's an important question. It's not all the questions that you're asking me are pretty great, but this one is actually important to pay attention to, because again, people have been people who've been following this probably understand why exactly and how everything is happening. But for some people who might have heard of it but might not have been paying full attention, it might have felt like Google has been talking about this for years. So is it actually happening? When is it actually happening? There was initially the plan to have third-party cookies phased out this year, 23. That was delayed, right? That was postponed once. Actually, it didn't happen multiple times. It was only done once, based on the feedback that we got from the industry that they had insufficient time to prepare for this phase out. Now, the timeline is to stop using third-party cookies in Chrome by the end of next year, 2024. So we're recording this in 23. So by the end of 24, third-party cookies will no longer be used in Chrome. Again, there's caveats, they can be partitioned and so on, but generally speaking, the way we know them, they won't be used in Chrome. And moreover, starting at some point, and we'll announce this, I suppose, more formally later this year, but at some point early next year, early in 2024, they will be phased out for 1% of Chrome stable users. So this is very important for you. You now know that you have the opportunity to see the impact of this deprecation live for your business, for your product, for your service. Now that you're aware of it, again, I can't tell you exactly when it's happening. I don't think we know it yet, but once it's announced, you will know, and you can start preparing for it now to say, okay, how are we going to test this? How are we going to segment out these users coming with cookies blocked and see how everything works for them? So that's important. That's on the timelines. And again, I cannot speak for the future. Anything can happen. We live in a fairly unpredictable world. God knows. There's a lot of things, externalities that can happen. But at least right now, based on the feedback from the ecosystem and the industry partners that we're working with, I see no reason why there should be any more delays. I feel like there is momentum. I feel like the industry understands the need, is preparing well for the coming changes. So if you're asking yourself, well, is it going to get delayed again? We don't have a crystal ball here, but my current feeling is that there is no reason why it should be.
So I think a lot of our listeners are either small to medium website owners or marketing professionals that are in charge of a website in the companies they're working in, or maybe even developers taking care of websites and not directly working at advertisers or something like that, or technology providers in that regard. If I'm a website owner and I have that now in mind, that in the beginning of the next year it will be tested and it will be rolled out completely by the end of the next year, what do I need to do with my website? Can I fully rely on that the industry, the tools I'm working with, the services I have implemented are preparing? Like you told, you're seeing activity there, they're doing good.
Yep.
Or is there anything I need to do, or is it just an industry technology level that is beyond me?
I get your question. I think it's the perfect way to look at this and a very important thing for us to consider. I think it's a combination of the two things you suggested. I drop LS because for a long time, actually, before starting to work on the Privacy Sandbox, I worked on related web technology, or not related to the Privacy Sandbox, but on web technologies in general, including performance and progressive web apps and that sort of stuff. Those of you who've maybe found me in the WordPress space and otherwise, they've probably seen me in that light. And I try to draw a lot of parallels here in the way we work on this. When you think about how we thought about improving performance, it was also a combination about things that you do yourself and things that you rely on, right? For example, forgive me this sidetrack, but I promise you it's relevant and we'll come back. When we're talking about performance, if you're using images on your site, you don't want to be using, PNGs. You want to replace them with optimized JPEGs so that they're more compressed and that they load fast. And this is under your control. Now, on the other hand, if you're using third-party libraries to deliver certain functionality, those libraries are not under your control. What they do, you cannot change how they work and how big they are and how efficient they are. What you can change is which library you choose and how you choose to deliver that functionality and whether you choose to have that functionality at all, right, in the first place. So if you think about it like that, hopefully then dealing with the outcomes of third-party cookie deprecation in Chrome for you will feel easier to grapple with. There are certain things, again, for our audience, it's unlikely, but just check, just in case. There's might be things that you might be doing on your own website, or maybe group of websites. In some cases, you might own like a small publishing conglomerate, right, with a few websites in it. There might be tooling that you're implementing where cookies are set across several sites. I'll give you an example. It's from a publisher that is maybe of a larger size than our typical listener here, but it's not that important. It's just that hopefully it's visual enough for everybody to understand. There's a publisher whose login flow, and not many of you even will have a login flow, but they do. So their login flow is such that the login server is placed on the .com domain, And then users from all the different countries that land on specific country pages, they always get redirected to that .com, get logged in, a cookie gets set, confirming the session status, and then they go back to wherever they were on .de or on .fr. In a scenario where third-party cookies are no longer working, a cookie from publisher.com will no longer be supported on publisher.de. Therefore, this whole flow, the way it's done, will stop operating in this way. The ways to get around it can be fixed. We're not going to get into too much detail on how you can fix this, but it's an example of where things can go wrong in terms of what you are doing yourself. And then you have two options. You either look at the fundamental of what it is that you're doing, like in case of this publisher, like, do we need to manage our identity management in this way? Is there another way that we can do it without this complex network of redirects? And maybe you can get rid of it altogether, and then there is no consideration at all. You don't have to worry about cookies or replacing cookies with anything. Or if you find like there's no alternative architecture and you have to have this kind of setup, then you go into the Privacy Sandbox documentation and you find the APIs or other types of solutions that enable you to get around it, right? So throw a couple of keywords in there so people can start looking things up. There's such a thing as first-party sets, right? If you only have a few sites, you can declare them all to belong to the same set. And in that case, cookies set between those sites, but within themselves, from one to the other, will be considered as first-party cookies. Because you as an owner, you have declared and it's been checked that they're all part of the same entity, so it's fine. They're like the same site. So that was the first part. What can you do as an owner of a publishing website, of an advertising website, maybe as a marketing specialist? What is it that you need to talk to your team about? And now about the industry. So remember that example of libraries that you might be using to deliver certain functionalities? It's the same here. What ad tech are you using? DSPs and SSPs. If you asked me 2-3 years ago, I didn't know what a DSP or an SSP is, I must confess. I learned a lot about that space in the past couple of years. I still don't know very much.
Maybe just assume we all don't know what it means.
There's demand-side platforms and sell-side platforms. I still get confused by exactly what is demand and what is but whatever, supply side. Basically, it's this magical world of programmatic advertising, where I guess you tell somebody they have some space on your site where you like to put some ads, and then somebody else comes in and says they have some display advertising, and it all gets magically matched and placed, and is interest-based and context-based, and it's all very amazing and helps everybody make some money and actually drive great traffic to their products and keeps the open web happy and thriving. Disclaimer, I don't know how exactly all of this works even right now. I have a vague understanding, but not the technical details of it. What I do know is a lot of the time, these companies, they use cookies to actually track, build up a profile. You can't even do it just with the cookies. Even right now, that's important to remember. Like, think about this. Even right now, very few, if you are in the edtech business and you're listening to us, or if you're adjacent to it and you kind of know a lot more than I do about this world, you probably know that it's unusual to base your entire setup just on cookies. You match the cookies that you have with additional information that you gather, right? And then you create a profile, and then you start figuring out like what a good marketing campaign looks like. Anyhow, but it's not just ads, right? We mentioned this before. It's cybersecurity, so you think about DDoS protection and even traffic management, sort of bot management, that sort of thing. A lot of that often relies on cookies, because what's the easiest way to say, like, if I identified a user as a human, I just set a cookie, and every time I see that user somewhere else, I know that's a human user. I don't have to check them again, right? It's a very simple way to do it, but it's a bit of a privacy violating way to do it, right? Because you're unnecessarily tracking this user across websites. So there are solutions for all of this. And what am I getting at? So there's all these different types of providers, identity. Let's name a few so that they're top of mind for you in terms of the critical user journeys that you might think on your website. So of course, advertising. Identity management, top of mind for me. Then personalization, definitely one. Cybersecurity in all its different aspects, including payment fraud, click fraud, that sort of stuff. Payment delivery itself, right, sometimes relies on cookies. What else? Embeds, lots of embeds. So when you think about embedding musical services, video services, chat services, these days artificial intelligence services, so all sorts of different third-party embeds that you might want to have on your site. Those I would probably be the ones that I'd call out the first. Maybe some more will come to mind. Now you look at them, and you need to do what I started calling an audit recently. An audit of all those services. Number one, are they using cookies? Okay, if they're using cookies, if those cookies are no longer working, will the whole service break? And you can test it right now. You can go into your Chrome settings, turn cookies off, and see what happens. Right, so that's the easiest thing to do. Turn off the cookies on your site, see if any of those services stop working or start working in unexpected ways. Right, you can't log in one of them, or they're like you've set them to dark mode, but they're showing light mode because they don't remember what you did and stuff like this. Once you understand that, you need to come up with a strategy. Either work with your agency of your choice or do it yourself, but come up with a strategy of what are you going to do. Let's imagine you have, I was very surprised when I realized that was the reality, but I'm no longer surprised anymore. Let's imagine you have a dozen different ad tech providers, maybe a couple of cybersecurity, your CDN, some embeds that you have. So you build up a bit of a profile of all these third-party services that you rely on. You need to research. There's publicly available information. Sometimes you need to dig around a little bit, but you need to do your research in terms of what those providers are doing, how are they responding to the deprecation of third-party cookies. And then you need to make decisions based on that information. Either you're entirely happy with the plan that you see them present, and you say, okay, it looks like our provider is totally ready and they will be ready in time, and we can just keep using their service and I don't need to do anything. Maybe the most you need to do is maybe you need to update the plugin that you're using if you're on WordPress, or like a similar approach where you just go from version 2 to version 3 and now it doesn't use cookies and that's it. You don't care. It might require, depending on what it is they're doing, might require a little bit of work on your side, right? You might need to remove something and put something new in its place, whatever. Or the most difficult decision, you might need to think about the alternative providers, right? Because if you don't feel, but this then is the way I like to think about it, so you can grapple with it a little bit easier, it's like due diligence. It's like when you were choosing these providers in the first place, you probably had criteria that enabled you to select them as ones that you can rely on. Well, now, not using cookies for the service is one of those criteria. So you need to do a reevaluation, and you only need to stick with those that are able to deliver their services without relying on third-party cookies. That's about it.
Yeah. The last one reminds me a little bit on the launch or the switch to GDPR, where we had in the general online marketing industry also a couple of years where it was announced, everybody knew it, and then when the change came, you had to do this data privacy or data processing contracts with your vendors and rely on them if they sign you the contract that they're compliant with certain industry standards or privacy standards, which we have now, that they just do their job to perform it. And I think it's the same here. In general, yes, the advertising industry has, or publishing industry has an internal strong purpose to be compliant with everything that is coming, because otherwise they will not have a successful business anymore after third-party cookies have deprecated. But what I get is basically two things, and I think that is very important. First of all, you told us about the APIs that are available and the documentation that is available, where we all have access to right now, right? So we can check the documentation or APIs of the Google Privacy Sandbox and just inform ourselves and do our own research, what is happening there, if we have new ways available for problems we might have on our websites through the usage of cookies, which are not available in the future anymore. And the second thing is, if we rely heavily on service providers for ad technology or whatever, do the due diligence if they are anticipating that and if they have a solution already. I think maybe now it's not the time to get nervous if they don't have an answer ready and implemented yet. There is time, I think.
I would agree. I would agree. It's not the time to get nervous. Maybe it's the right time to get in touch.
Yeah. get in touch, have conversations, and also observe how that companies are communicating and if they get nervous. And I would say, maybe I can say that bluntly, but if your technology provider is really sweating about that technology change, you maybe have reasons to dig into and do your due diligence, what is happening there or how they're providing their ad tech services or whatever. Because for reasons, I think.
Yeah, no, look, I'm glad that you said it, but I can echo you here quite strongly. Just, you mentioned GDPR. I think what we must emphasize here is that it's not a question of compliance here. Right? Google is not a regulator. And also, we haven't really talked about it much, but the Privacy Sandbox is not, as some people have stipulated, speculated, is purely a response to regulation. Because globally, regulation actually varies very differently. I think it's, if anything, it's a response to our realization that users expect this kind of privacy respect. But the reason I come back to you mentioning GDPR is that there it's a question of compliance, and there it's a question of then you having your vendors having a contractual obligation to you to respect local laws and regulations, and if they violate it, there's consequences and this and that. Here we're more talking about the fact, well, is it going to work or not? Because there's no contractual obligation to not use cookies. The reality is though that if you are using cookies, your service just won't work or won't work as well in Chrome. So you will be, as a site owner, you will have a service that isn't working or isn't working like it's supposed to. And so it's not a violation of anything other than the fact that you're not getting what you're paying for.
You mentioned that Privacy Sandbox is something that user expect, or like increased privacy in the web is something user expect, and this is the reaction to it. There are some critiques or like opinions people maybe have about that, into the direction that the Privacy Sandbox also could be seen as something where Google is creating a centralistic solution of getting in more control what is happening with cookies, bringing Google ultimately into the position of having more control over what is happening, especially in regards of advertising or whatever. Can you answer a little bit on that question, how we should think about Google going into that endeavor of a Privacy Sandbox?
That's a tough question. That's a tough question, but a good question. I'm very happy that you're asking it, and we can talk about it a little bit. So I totally recognize that people have these concerns, and I have heard them myself, right? What I think we can try to explore to help us answer. So, because there are concerns, I will not, and I don't want to, and I cannot just say, hey, well, you're wrong, you shouldn't have these concerns, because that's not how you address these things. If people have concerns, they're valid. There must be reasons why their past experiences lead them to have these concerns. So my answer then is going to be not so much to say, oh no, you're right, I know you're wrong, but let's think about what is actually happening. How is the Privacy Sandbox being developed and rolled out? Number one, it is completely transparent, right? The APIs and the solutions that we've been mentioning so far, they're all first published as intents to implement, as descriptions, as initial thoughts, proposals. Look up for example, the IP protection proposal that is out there now on GitHub. They'll publish on GitHub, first of all, as these general concepts, like we would like to do a thing that looks like this, right? And then people come in, people from the industry, users and so on, come in and leave their own perspectives, open issues, and try to shape where this develops. Then there is a period of trials, origin trials, potentially multiple ones of each solution. And we've seen examples specifically in the Privacy Sandbox where several APIs have either been completely sort of abandoned because of the feedback, or transformed themselves into entirely new proposals with different features thanks to the feedback that has been received. So aspect number one that to me addresses these concerns is the transparency in which the new solutions are being proposed. It's not being built in secrecy somewhere in a lab and then secretly rolled out so that one morning everybody wakes up in this new reality. This is all being done in the open. The second aspect of it is the collaborative aspect of it. Directly through one-to-one communication in more scalable ways like this amazing podcast. our participation in industry events, from advertising industry events like Demexco, where, by the way, if anybody listening to us is going to Demexco this year, I won't be there because I'll be on vacation, but lots of my great colleagues will be there. So by all means, go find them, talk to them about this. Google is very much present in those industry events, but also in spaces like where Marcus and I met, at WordPress events and other sort of technology events as well, where we talk about this and try to bring this information to as many people as we possibly can, not only to educate, sort of one way, but also to get feedback and to hear back and to take those insights into account in how we do things, how we develop, how we roll out, and everything. That's aspect number 2. Aspect number 3, if you haven't heard about them yet, I don't know, we'll probably drop a link to that as well. But Google has made formal commitments to the Competition Marketing Authority in the UK, so often referred to as the CMA. And these are the CMA commitments that Google has made in the context of the Privacy Sandbox to sort of behave, I suppose, in the simplified version, to conduct the rollout of the Privacy Sandbox in a particular way, right? And we've been engaged with, Google Chrome has been engaged with the CMA for over a year now, a number of years potentially even, getting continuous feedback, publishing reports again. So there is oversight. So we have transparency, we have communication, and we have oversight. Now, I know that for some, it will be hard to be convinced, regardless of all of that. But I hope that at least, even if your concerns still remain, this gives you a way to understand how can you prepare yourself and organize yourself in such a way that these processes are more helpful to you. Now that you know how development is done, now that you know how feedback is collected and how information is being shared, now that you know the oversight that exists, and I mentioned the CMA because it's probably right now probably the most visible engagement that Google has, but Google engages very actively, Google Chrome, Android engage very actively with other regulators as well across the world. So if you want to engage through your local regulators, you should, right? So you have all these mechanisms and all these processes that ideally empower you to address the concerns that you have and hopefully have a better way to deal with them rather than just being frustrated by the fact that something is happening outside of your control. I hope this helps.
It was a great answer. Thank you very much on that. Do you have anything that you want to tell us about the Privacy Sandbox? So my questions are answered pretty comprehensively, and would move to your 2 truths and 1 lie if you don't have anything to add.
Yeah, this was great. I think we covered a lot of stuff. What I want to tell you, look, I can't emphasize enough the need to do those audits. One thing that I've discovered, and this is already, so we're starting to speak here a little bit, we're still on the record, but kind of a little bit more casually. I've been doing a lot of site audits myself recently. At events, right? At the recent WordCamp in Athens, we did a bunch of office hours and a bunch of site audits. And I do this one-to-one communication with a lot of partners. And generally, I've been looking at a lot of sites in my life before, in the context of maybe, for example, performance. And now I'm looking at a lot of different tabs in the Chrome developer tools, basically. I'm looking at trying to find all the cookies. And one thing that I've learned is that it's damn hard, right? It's very, very, it's a convoluted process. It's not like you click a button and then all of a sudden you know all the cookies and what they all do. And it's not only hard for an outsider. What I've also discovered, unless like it's, even if it's literally like unless it's your personal blog that has no embeds and it consists entirely of just text and doesn't even have fonts embedded. So unless it's as simple as that, your website will have some dependencies. And if it is anything a little bit more complex as a business, you will have multiple teams doing different things, and your marketing team doing your, for example, your monetization, and your security team doing, I don't know, your bot protection. Probably different teams, but they're all relying on services that might be using cookies. So there's often not a single source of truth within a given company, within a given organization, on what cookies are used and for what purpose. So be prepared for this, that once you start diving in, if you're an owner good for you. You can just mandate from the top, like, everybody, bring me a report by the end of next week. What cookies are you using? If you are a CMO, if you are somehow else involved and you're a leader of a different team in the company, influence upwards so that the CEO, the owner, the board give you the mandate to collect this information and start collecting this information. Engage in it early. Ideally, have somebody dedicated to this effort and owning this. If you're that advanced as a business that you have a chief privacy officer, then lucky you, your chief privacy officer just got a new task. Chief data officers also often own this process. But again, even they often don't have a full overview. So whether you have them or not, the CPOs and the CDOs, get someone or a team that starts collecting and assembling that overview of all your cookie dependencies. Because even that was going to take time and often will not be a straightforward process. Be prepared for that, start early. And then, like we discussed with Marcus right now, you'll have to start engaging with your third-party providers. That might also take some time, right? And if you need to do those switches, ideally you need to do due diligence on other aspects than just whether they're using cookies or not. So we have time now. And as we said, the timeline for full third-party cookie deprecation in Chrome is the second half of 2024. So we just have just about a year, maybe already less than a year. So that feels like that's just about enough, but don't delay, please. So that's my final call.
Great final words on the topic of cookie deprecation and Privacy Sandbox and the cookieless web, but it's way more than that. I learned that today. Thank you, Andrey, for your insights. We now want to finally my English is not good today. We now want to finally find the lie you were telling me. So could you recite your 3 facts you've told
here we
us?
Go. So fact number 1, I've lived in 14 cities. Fact number 2, I built my first website at the age of 19. Fact number 3, I speak 9 languages.
Okay. Could you please tell me, wish me a good morning in 9 different languages?
It's just guten Morgen. Das meinst du? Ja, guten Morgen, bonjour, buenos dias, ni hao, доброе утро. Which other ones? Konnichiwa.
Okay, you were picking some low-hanging fruits. I see my question was too easy. Why would you live in 14 cities or in 14 different locations in your lifetime?
I was looking for the perfect place until I found Zurich, almost. I think partly it was in my childhood. It was to do with my parents and their job that took us to several different places. And then my studies, and then eventually also my work. So I kind of kept traveling.
Okay. I believe that it's true that you built your first website with 19. I think that is the truth. You built it at your university. Fact check. I also think 14 cities is a lot, but if you started with moving around with your family as you have been a kid, that could probably be a truth, and I will lock it in. It could also lead you to speak a lot of languages, but I don't think you lived in like 9 or 10 different countries so far. So I think 9 languages is a lie. I think you speak like maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 languages. I think that is the lie.
Spot on. This is perfect. This is exactly the truth. I did live in many countries, but I think what helped is that some of those countries speak the same language. So like Ireland and in England, for example, or like Switzerland and Germany to some degree at least. Well, Switzerland helps me because I got both, French and German. And on the languages, it's a lie insofar as I do believe that I speak reasonably well 5.
That's already a lot.
Yeah, and then the other ones are the ones I do on Duolingo. So highly recommend.
When Duolingo chases you with notifications on the smartphone. It's a very, very pushy app to remind you to learn your language drills.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, I like that. Those kind of. Okay, we should do another podcast about effective push notifications. Those ones are the good ones.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Andrey, for your time, for your insights. It was a really valuable episode for me, and I hope for our listeners also. Sad to hear that you're not at the DMXCO. I'm there this year, so if you want to meet some Googlers, contact Andrey in the comments, or if you want to meet me, feel free to write me in the comment. I'm in Cologne in September, and thank you for your time, and have a nice day and weekend.
Thanks for having me, Marcus. It was amazing. Thank you.
The Online Marketing Cabin is brought to you by Impside, Europe's biggest WordPress agency. If you run a website or online shop or are in need of a WordPress or WooCommerce plugin, Impside is your go-to agency for solutions on an enterprise scale.